Supporting Literacy in Older Struggling Readers. Presented by Dr. Christy Austin.
First, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to be talking today about supporting older struggling readers. And I think it's important to share a little bit about where I come from because I think it informs the work that I do. And so I worked as a teacher primarily at a KIPP school. KIPP is a national network of charter schools. I was in San Antonio, Texas, so we served almost 100% English learners. And that was a middle school. And so we were working with kind of emerging adolescent struggling readers who the vast majority were reading below grade level. And we had to figure out how we were going to help these students kind of rise to the occasion to achieve grade level proficiency. And, I'll pat us on the backs and say we did it really well. And so, I think that was a fun experience. I also worked with almost all of our students with disabilities through the district and worked at a private school for students with dyslexia. And so, the private school was sort of this polar opposite experience where I moved from the world where 99% of our students were on free and reduced price lunch to a private school where, parents were paying upwards of $40,000 for a 6-year-old to attend school. And so, you could imagine that we got two types of students. We got very, very everybody was economically privileged, although there were some students there on scholarship support. But we also got students for whom kindergarten and first grade had just really failed them. They came to us in second grade totally broken from the experiences that they'd received in their previous school, whatever school that might have been. And so, I've kind of paired those experiences together to think about how can we help students who are either with or at risk for disabilities or students who do not speak English as their native language to have more successful school experiences. And I'm particularly focused, my research is on students who have kind of gone past those early elementary grades and they're still struggling because I think we have this assumption that students all enter fourth grade ready to read, to learn, and acquire new information, and yet I'm preaching to the choir. You guys know it's just not true, right? And so that's what I'm excited to present today. So let's go ahead and get started. So I have 3 objectives. We're going to cover 3 evidence-based practices today. And so some of this might be new to some people. It might be repetitive for others. I ask that you just bear with me because the way I present it is really talking about how we can integrate these components with each other. And so I'm going to talk about providing robust vocabulary instruction, going beyond just brief incidental vocabulary instruction that we see so commonly in classrooms to help students develop a deep and precise understanding of the words that they are learning. The second evidence-based practice is that I'm going to talk about using a really flexible strategy to promote multisyllabic word reading. I'm assuming many of us in this room have some experience with some of the syllable division strategies that are pretty structured and formatted. And what I've seen from my experiences working with students with dyslexia is that works really well for some students and it works less well for others. And so I'm going to introduce a strategy people might be less familiar with that I've found works well for all students. And then finally, I'm going to talk about providing systematic and explicit strategy instruction to help students find the main idea and write brief summaries about the texts they're learning about, knowing that we remember things that we think about deeply and often. And so if we have students writing about what they're reading about, it will help them recall and kind of retain the information that they're learning about. And finally, I'm going to kind of interweave all of that using a grade level text. And so I'm going to model how these practices can be interwoven and integrated so that students are practicing these skills with grade level content, knowing that we always have this sort of tension and intervention between students have to be pulled out of something, what are they missing, and what impact then does that have on their continued development. But they also deserve to learn and get the intervention they need to become proficient readers. And so I kind of work with that tension in using grade level text to provide the intervention students need. And so let's dive in first with some academic vocabulary instruction. So I want to dive into a couple problems with what I currently see. So first of all, I'm going to go back to my own teaching because I think rather than criticize what's happening in others' classrooms, let's be critical of our own, right? And I have this distinct memory of working in middle school and telling my students that the word visible meant that something could be easily seen. And then I asked students, I gave a couple models, I tried to do my grade instruction, I gave a couple examples of how that word was used, and then I said, who can use the word visible in a sentence? And I had a student who looked up at me and said, I can visible the board from my desk. And I'm like, that makes total sense. Like it was completely logical, right? And it was my failure as a teacher, right? I was thinking to myself, well, I don't think I defined it incorrectly. I think that definition still works. my student didn't deeply and precisely understand that word, right? And so we're providing this vocabulary instruction that's not really getting to the heart of having students develop a deep understanding that lets them truly own words and master them so they can use them themselves. But we also have this problem with reading interventions where when I talk to most secondary teachers, when I'm talking about adolescent readers, and I say, what do your students struggle with? They always tell me reading comprehension. That's the first answer. And if you probe a little further, then the answer you get is, well, they're pretty good word readers. And my question to that is always, what does that mean to you when you say a student's a pretty good word reader, right? Because that means different things to different people. And ultimately, what I've come to for most secondary teachers is that to them, that means that their students can read most of the words on the page. They can decode, right? And that they perceive that their only difficulties are in reading comprehension. But what we know from research is that very few students have isolated difficulties in reading comprehension. We know 85 to 95% of students who struggle with comprehension of grade level text also have word level reading difficulties, either reading words accurately or most of the time reading words efficiently. And so, most of our older struggling readers need some continued instruction in multisyllabic word reading. I also want to go into this 4-part processor because it drives a lot of the work that I do. And so it's a theory, and rather than talk about this in boring ways, right, I'll kind of try to keep it simple here, but readers use 4 sources of information to read words. They use the orthography of a word, which is just a fancy way to say the letters or the letter combinations that make up a word. And so, if I don't usually have to prove to people that orthography is important, right, but these words kernel, epitome, and yacht are great examples. Imagine trying to decode those words if you didn't have some visual memory for how those words were spelled, right? Especially kernel and yacht, right? And so, orthography matters. We have to understand the spelling of a word. Phonology also matters, a fancy way to say the sounds that make up the individual letters and letter combinations and the pronunciation of the word as a whole, right? And so now imagine encountering the word epitome and you see the letters and letter combinations. A struggling reader 100% of the time is going to say epitome, right? And so imagine that if you didn't kind of understand the sounds that make up that word, you have no ability to decode it, right? Also, after you've learned the relationship between the orthography and the phonology of a word, which is done through really effective phonics instruction, now we come to words where we have letter patterns that map to a number of different sounds. Our English language is deep and opaque, right? And so EA can say E like in meat, it can say eh like in bread, A like in steak, or it can even split between those 2 letters and indicate different syllables like idea or meander, right? And so we think about how complex our English language is. If that one felt complex, OUGH is probably the most complex pattern we have in our English language, right? It can say O like in though, through, ooh like in through, ah like in thought, ow like in plow, like in tough, or off like in cough, right? And so we just think about these letter patterns and then we wonder why students struggle with reading, right? It's all very complex. And so we teach the relationship between letters and sounds, and then we expect that from there students are just sort of going to take off. But we often neglect recognizing the role that semantics or meaning plays in reading words. And so I look at a word like epitome, I come back to that one because I have a distinct memory myself as an 8th grader reading aloud and reading epitome and several kids laughing, and then the teacher corrected me and said epitome, and I'm like, oh, I know that word, right? And all of a sudden I'd made that connection between the orthography, the phonology, and the meaning of that word. Whereas I knew that word orally before, but I didn't know the printed version of it. I hadn't made the connection between all 3 of those parts. And so, we have some kind of evidence that semantics plays a big role. Even in proficient readers, you guys as adult readers would read the word delicious much more efficiently than you would recognize that word sagacious. If that word sagacious was not a word that you were super familiar with, right? I can come in, I like to pull out words that most adults don't use in their everyday language, like absquatulate, right? I can use the word absquatulate, and I could put it here on paper, and I could say, hey, everyone, let's decode that word. And you guys are great readers. You would go syllable by syllable, and you'd probably get pretty close, right? But you would, next time you encountered it, you would have to still decode that syllable by syllable, unless I did some really great vocabulary instruction that taught you what that word meant. And so if you're wondering, absquatulate means that you leave somewhere in a really hurried or fast way. The answer is that the example I like to give is Cinderella had to absquatulate from the ball before midnight because her dress was going to turn to rags, right? And then I might do a little prompting like, why might a bank robber want to absquatulate from the bank when he heard the sirens, right? And he'd have to absquatulate because, he knows the cops are coming. He doesn't want to be arrested, right? He doesn't want to get in trouble. But, once you know the meaning of that word, and I've built that deep and precise knowledge of what that word means, you would no longer have to decode that word syllable by syllable. It would then be committed to memory. This is part of the orthographic mapping process. Students have to map from letters to sounds, decode a word, and then after they've sounded out that word, then they have to connect to meaning of a word that's part of their oral vocabulary. And obviously, we don't need really deep and precise meaning, but if we're working with words that are high impact and are really great academic vocabulary words, why not also build some deep and precise meaning that helps students both comprehend the complex passages they're reading, but also learn to recognize those words more readily in the future? And then finally, of course, context interacts with meaning, right? And so we don't just read words in isolation. One of the problems with interventions is we do far too often read words in isolation, right? But in real authentic reading experiences, students are reading complex multisyllabic words in the context of sentences, paragraphs, and large passages in connected text. And so, then I take a word like RECORD, and, a doctor might keep a record of my vaccinations, but here today they are recording my presentation, right? And so I have to consider context to then figure out, how am I going to read that word correctly? And so this kind of guides a lot of the work that I do, and I think it's important people understand this framework. And so the solution I'm going to propose today is that we can really integrate instruction across orthography, phonology, and semantics, bringing in the context through these context and complex text passages that students have to read and understand across their school days. And so rather than have that awkward moment where I as a presenter have to decide, am I gonna read something to you, or are you gonna silently read while I kind of sit and watch you? I decided that I would pick a speech, right? And so I took Elie Wiesel's speech, The Perils of Indifference, that he gave, and I thought we could listen to him give this speech. You have a copy of it visually in your packet as a handout, and so feel free to follow along if you want, or just watch Elie Wiesel himself present the speech.
Mr. President, Mrs. Clinton, members of Congress, Ambassador Holbrooke, Excellencies, friends. 54 years ago, to the day, a young Jewish boy from a small town in the Carpathian Mountains woke up, not far from Goethe's beloved Weimar, in a place of eternal infamy called Buchenwald. He was finally free, but there was no joy in his heart. He thought there never would be again. Liberated a day earlier by American soldiers, he remembers their rage at what they saw. And even if he lives to be a very old man, he will always be grateful to them for that rage and also for their compassion. Though he did not understand their language, their eyes told him what he needed to know, that they too would remember and bear witness. And now I stand before you, Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief of the army that freed me and tens of thousands of others, and I am filled with a profound and abiding gratitude to the American people. Gratitude is a word that I cherish. Gratitude is what defines the humanity of the human being. And I'm grateful to you, Hillary or Mrs. Clinton, for what you said and for what you are doing for children in the world, for the homeless, for the victims of injustice, the victims of destiny and society, and I thank all of you for being here. We are on the threshold of a new century, a new millennium. What will the legacy of this vanishing century be? How will it be remembered in the new millennium? Surely it will be judged, and judged severely, in both moral and metaphysical terms. Its failures have cast a dark shadow over humanity. 2 world wars, countless civil wars, a senseless chain of assassinations, Gandhi, the Kennedys, Martin Luther King, Sadat, Rabin, bloodbaths in Cambodia and Algeria, India and Pakistan, Ireland and Rwanda, Eritrea and Ethiopia, Sarajevo and Kosovo, the inhumanity in the Gulag and the tragedy of Hiroshima, and on a different level, of course, Auschwitz and Treblinka. So much violence, so much indifference. What is indifference? Etymologically, the word means no difference. A strange and unnatural state in which the lines blur between light and darkness, dusk and dawn, crime and punishment, cruelty and compassion, good and evil. What are its causes and inescapable consequences? Is it a philosophy? Is there a philosophy of indifference conceivable? Can one possibly view indifference as a virtue? Is it necessary at times to practice it simply to keep one's sanity, live normally, enjoy a fine meal and a glass of wine, as the world around us experiences harrowing upheavals? Of course, indifference can be tempting. More than that, seductive. It is so much easier to look away from victims. It is so much easier to avoid such rude interruptions to our work, our dreams, our hopes. It is, after all, awkward, troublesome to be involved in another person's pain and despair. Yet for the person who is indifferent, his or her neighbor are of no consequence, and therefore their lives are meaningless. Their hidden or even visible anguish is of no interest. Indifference reduces the other to an abstraction. Over there, behind the black gates of Auschwitz, the most tragic of all prisoners were the Muselmänner, as they were called. Wrapped in their torn blankets, they would sit or lie on the ground, staring vacantly into space, unaware of who or where they were, strangers to their surroundings. They no longer felt pain, hunger, thirst. They feared nothing. They felt nothing. They were dead and did not know it. Rooted in our tradition, some of us felt that to be abandoned by humanity then was not the ultimate. We felt that to be abandoned by God was worse than to be punished by Him. Better an unjust God than an indifferent one. For us to be ignored by God was a harsher punishment than to be a victim of his anger. Man can live far from God, not outside God. God is wherever we are, even in suffering, even in suffering. In a way, to be indifferent to that suffering is what makes the human being inhuman. Indifference, after all, is more dangerous than anger and hatred. Anger can at times be creative. One writes a great poem, a great symphony. One does something special for the sake of humanity because one is angry at the injustice that one witnesses. But indifference is never creative. Even hatred at times may elicit a response. You fight it. You denounce it. You disarm it. Indifference elicits no response. Indifference is not a response. Indifference is not a beginning. It is an end. And therefore, indifference is always the friend of the enemy, for it benefits the aggressor, never his victim whose pain is magnified when he or she feels forgotten. The political prisoner in his cell, the hungry children, the homeless refugees, not to respond to their plight, not to relieve their solitude by offering them a spark of hope, is to exile them from human memory. And in denying their humanity, we betray our own. Indifference, then, is not only a sin, it is a punishment. And this is one of the most important lessons of these outgoing centuries' wide-ranging experiments in good and evil. In the place where I come from, society was composed of three simple categories: the killers, the victims, and the bystanders. During the darkest of times, inside the ghettos and death camps, and I'm glad that Mrs. Clinton mentioned that we are now commemorating that event, that period, that we are now in the days of remembrance. But then we felt abandoned, forgotten. All of us did. And our only miserable consolation was that we believed that Auschwitz and Treblinka were closely guarded secrets, that the leaders of the free world did not know what was going on behind those black gates and barbed wire, that they had no knowledge of the war against the Jews that Hitler's armies and their accomplices waged as part of their war against the Allies. If they knew, we thought, surely those leaders would have moved heaven and earth to intervene. They would have spoken out with greater outrage and conviction. They would have bombed the railways leading to Birkenau, just the railways, just once. And now we knew, we learned, we discovered that the Pentagon knew, the State Department knew. And the illustrious occupant of the White House then, who was a great leader, and I say it with some anguish and pain, because today is exactly 54 years marking his death. Franklin Delano Roosevelt died on April the 12th, 1945. So he is very much present to me and to us. No doubt he was a great leader. He mobilized the American people and the world, going into battle, bringing hundreds and thousands of valiant and brave soldiers in America to fight fascism, to fight dictatorship, to fight Hitler. And so many of the young people fell in battle. And nevertheless, his image in Jewish history, I must say it, his image in Jewish history is flawed. The depressing tale of the St. Louis is a case in point. 60 years ago, its human cargo, nearly 1,000 Jews, was turned back to Nazi Germany. And that happened after the Kristallnacht, after the first state-sponsored pogrom with hundreds of Jewish shops destroyed, synagogues burned, thousands of people put in concentration camps. And that ship, which was already in the shores of the United States, was sent back. I don't understand. Roosevelt was a good man with a heart. He understood those who needed help. Why didn't he allow these refugees to disembark? 1,000 people in America, the great country, the greatest democracy, the most generous of all new nations in modern history. What happened? I don't understand. Why the indifference on the highest level to the suffering of the victims? But then there were human beings who were sensitive to our tragedy. Those non-Jews, those Christians that we call the righteous Gentiles, whose selfless acts of heroism saved the honor of their faith. Why were they so few? Why was there a greater effort to save SS murderers after the war than to save their victims during the war? Why did some of America's largest corporations continue to do business with Hitler's Germany until 1942? It has been suggested, and it was documented, that the Wehrmacht could not have conducted its invasion of France without oil obtained from American sources. How is one to explain their indifference? And yet, my friends, good things have also happened in this traumatic century. The defeat of Nazism, the collapse of communism, the rebirth of Israel on its ancestral soil, the demise of apartheid, Israel's peace treaty with Egypt, the peace accord in Ireland. And let us remember the meeting filled with drama and emotion between Rabin and Arafat that you, Mr. President, convened in this very place. I was here, and I will never forget it. And then, of course, the joint decision of the United States and NATO to intervene in Kosovo and save those victims, those refugees, those who were uprooted by a man whom I believe that because of his crimes should be charged with crimes against humanity. But this time, the world was not silent. This time, we do respond. This time, we intervene. Does it mean that we have learned from the past? Does it mean that society has changed? Has the human being become less indifferent and more human? Have we really learned from our experiences? Are we less insensitive to the plight of victims of ethnic cleansing and other forms of injustices in places near and far? Is today's justified intervention in Kosovo, led by you, Mr. President, a lasting warning that never again will the deportation, the terrorization of children and their parents be allowed anywhere in the world? Will it discourage other dictators in other lands to do the same? What about the children? Oh, we see them on television, we read about them in the papers. And we do so with a broken heart. Their fate is always the most tragic, inevitably. When adults wage war, children perish. We see their faces, their eyes. Do we hear their pleas? Do we feel their pain, their agony? Every minute, one of them dies of disease, violence, famine. Some of them, so many of them, could be saved. And so, once again, I think of the young Jewish boy from the Carpathian Mountains. He has accompanied the old man I have become throughout these years of quest and struggle. And together we walk towards the new millennium, carried by profound fear and extraordinary hope.
Right, so heavy speech, right? Timely for what's going on in the world today. And I thought we would dive in because these are the kinds of complex texts students are being asked to read and understand as they enter the secondary grades. And so let's start with some vocabulary instruction. And I want to set the stage a little bit, right? We have to differentiate between the vast number of words that students could be taught and which words are most important. And so tiered vocabulary frameworks are one way to think about that, to think about what words we're going to select for vocabulary instruction. But I think whenever we think about vocabulary frameworks, it's also important to note that a vocabulary framework doesn't differentiate between, it's not trying to discriminate the superiority of some words over others. I think that's important to say, right? We are not trying to eliminate the use of tier 1 vocabulary from students' vocabulary repertoires and replace that with tier 2 and tier 3 words, right? We all speak in everyday language in ways that use tier 1 words. All of us. It does not matter how educated, quote unquote, we are, right? We all speak in very simple ways. Instead, we're trying to help provide access to students to the complex texts they're expected to read and understand, and allow them to write in ways that they can communicate really precisely about these texts, right? And most of our Tier 2 words expand on the Tier 1 words by providing more kind of exact and precise ways to communicate. And so Tier 1 words are common words that are used in everyday conversation. We do not need to teach these words to students. They're words that students already know. If we're working with early English learners who are just beginning to acquire the English language, we still don't need to teach these words. These words are acquired by being kind of immersed in rich language, everyday language with their peers. Tier 2 vocabulary words are academic words. They're not frequently used in everyday conversations, and so they do need to be taught, because if they're not taught, they won't be learned, right? Students will encounter them during academic discourse, discussions about complex texts, during reading in their coursework across the entire school day, and they'll be expected to use these words when they write about the information they are learning about. And so these are big bang for our buck words. They're used across a wide variety of contexts. So students will be likely to encounter these words in science class, and again in history, and again in math. And so, teaching these words gives us a big bang for our buck. Finally, Tier 3 words are also infrequently used in everyday conversations, but they're specific to a single subject area. And so it's not that these words do not require instruction. A word like abolitionist requires instruction when a student's in history, but a student's not likely to see that word when they get to math or science, right? And so we're going to leave the teaching of that word to the content area teachers. And so we're really going to focus in today on those Tier 2 vocabulary words, knowing that these are words that are going to appear frequently across a wide variety of subject areas, and they're going to be seen often over and over again throughout the school day. So, here, let's look at some of our words here. Fingers, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. Friend, Tier 1, good, excellent, used in everyday conversations. What about Buchenwald? Yeah, very specific to the Holocaust, right? All right. Old. Good, Tier 1. Profound. Good, I'm seeing a lot of 2s. I would have classified that as a Tier 2 word as well. Injustice. Good, I'm seeing a lot of 2s as well. Some people are saying, I'm not sure. And so if you're thinking to yourself, I think that word is kind of academic. I don't tend to run around in my everyday life using it, but I think my students might know it. That's the right kind of thinking, right? Students can already be familiar with a Tier 2 word, and that means we don't want to teach it, but it still could have been a Tier 2 word for some students. And then finally, society. Yeah, and so I'd call it 2. Some people are saying 1, right? It's kind of the same, right? Very young students or, students who don't have large vocabulary repertoires, I could see it possibly being a Tier 2, but for many students, it would be known. And so, as I looked at this passage, I just went through and underlined, and I didn't even do a deep dive into it. I just underlined a bunch of the Tier 2 words I saw in the first 2 paragraphs. And so in the first 2 paragraphs alone, we have perils, indifference, eternal, infamy, liberated, compassion, the phrase bear witness, cherish, profound, abiding, gratitude, defines, humanity, injustice, destiny, right? There are so many words. How do we begin to discriminate between which of these require instruction and which the students could kind of, hey, I know I can't teach 15 words in one lesson, right? That's way too many. And so I have to kind of discriminate which of these words are most important for understanding this passage. And so the questions I ask myself as I go through a passage like this is I'm going to take a certain section of this text and I'm going to think, well, which words are most important for understanding the text at large? And so, as I looked at this passage, immediately within these 2 paragraphs, the words indifference shot out. If you didn't understand indifference, this entire speech would be lost on you, right? And if you didn't understand the word injustice, you really couldn't connect what had happened in the Holocaust to the injustices he's speaking about that are happening worldwide, right? And so I thought to myself, those 2 words are really important from these particular paragraphs. But I could have made a case for other words as well, right? And so it kind of depends on what you want to talk about. The other thing I always think about is, are there some of these words that I anticipate most of my students would know? I don't want to waste time teaching students words that they're already familiar with. And so, of course, for secondary students here, words like define, right? Gratitude, rage. I might anticipate a lot of my students know those words. I might not select them because I anticipate I don't need to teach those explicitly. And so from here, I just picked 3 words to model some of these practices today. And I picked the words indifferent, profound, and injustice. And so indifferent, you know, if I go and look it up in a dictionary, the dictionary definition is not going to be terribly helpful to teach the meaning of this word to students. And so dictionaries are just really, they stink, right? They're not helpful to students, yet they tend to be the most widely used practice for understanding the meaning of an unfamiliar word. And we tend to teach students to go reference a dictionary, particularly as they become more accessible online. And we just tell, well, just type in the word, go figure out what it means. Well, if I got to the definition and it said, marked by impartiality or apathy, right? I looked it up. This is what it says, right? And so, you know, when I think about that, I'm thinking, well, if I don't know what indifferent means, I'm probably not going to know what impartiality means. And I'm probably not going to know what apathy means. And like, marked by, like that's kind of an abstract phrase, right? And so I think about how unhelpful these dictionary definitions are. And I think back to my English learners and I think, well, what would my students have done if they'd come across this definition? And I know what they would have done. They would have said, well, Miss Austin taught us what in means. It means not. And so indifferent must mean not different, right? And so then they would give me the use of this word in a sentence and they would say, me and my best friend are indifferent in the music we love. We love the same music. We're not different, right? And I would leave there thinking, what I told them to do, look up the meaning of the word, wasn't very effective, right? Profound, same way. I looked it up. Having intellectual depth and insight, very great, right? When I think of very great, well, very great is like probably one of the most abstract phrases you could throw up there on the board, right? When I think about what very great means, my students likely would have said, well, I made a profound 3-pointer at the end of the game. Right? It was really great, you guys. It was profound, right? And so, you know, when I think about these meanings, they're just not helpful. We have to go beyond here. So what we need to do is create student-friendly definitions, but our instruction can't stop there, right? And so student-friendly definitions, I think there's 2 things we can focus on. Number 1, we can use language that's familiar to students. And we have to know something about the language needs of our students to do that, right? But we can use language we anticipate they'll understand. They know what those words mean. And second, I don't find it very helpful for most students, particularly when they're struggling with language or with academic language, to give a part of speech. Parts of speech are rather abstract. If I can work the part of speech into the definition, I find it's much more helpful for students. And so instead of saying, indifferent means feeling apathetic, right? Some words students don't know. I came up with a student-friendly definition that said if someone feels indifferent, now we know indifferent is something you can feel, right? If someone feels indifferent, they don't care one way or another, or they don't have strong feelings or opinions about something. We have to remember just because a definition's long doesn't mean it's complex. That's much clearer than what we came to before, right? It's so much more clear than marked by impartiality or apathy. Way shorter, but far less clear. Profound. If something is profound, it is so deep and meaningful that it makes you stop and reflect. Now I know profound's an adjective. I didn't have to define it that way, right? Because if something is profound, well, it's a word that's describing something, right? I want you all to take a second on your sheet, and you can capture this anywhere you want. There's a handout for you, but if you don't want that, just in a notebook somewhere. Take your first attempt at creating a student-friendly definition for the word injustice with your table. And I've started you off. An injustice is. Excellent. Any table willing to share? So first of all, was that harder than you thought it was going to be? Coming up with student-friendly definitions is not easy, right? It is the crux of good vocabulary instruction, and yet it's incredibly challenging to do. Is any table willing to share their definition they came up with? Go ahead.
Haley said, an injustice is something you observe that is not right or fair.
So an injustice is something you observe that is not right or fair. I love it. Very easy to understand. And doesn't include like some part of speech that feels abstract or cumbersome to students, or that abstract language like marked by, right? That's kind of language that's not helpful to students. And so, one of the things I find interesting and important about student-friendly definitions is that we have to make sure that we are using language that's familiar and easy to understand by students, but also getting to the kind of precise meaning of the word. We don't want to lose that precise meaning, right? And that's what I liked about yours. You know, I think if you could kind of make sure it's clear through the definition that an injustice is something that's deeply unfair, it could be even more powerful, right? And so, you know, that's something I think we can all work on just helping students get to, is like that deep and precise understanding of meaning of words, and we do that through a really effective student-friendly definition. And so now I'm going to put you guys through a series of exercises that teach you how to teach vocabulary deeply, because it goes beyond just what I tend to see in classrooms is we're great at giving the student-friendly definition, we're great at giving 1 or 2 models of how that word is used, and then we have students go write a sentence. That's what tends to be done, and the truth is students are nowhere near being ready to write a sentence after just hearing that word modeled once or twice. Research would suggest students need 12 to 16 exposures to a word before they've even begun to master that word, and that might not even be on the most deep and precise levels. So let's do a listening activity. You guys don't even need your paper. Just thumbs up, thumbs down. Get ready to give me thumbs up, thumbs down. I'm going to provide some situations. You give me a thumbs up if the situation is an example of being indifferent or feeling indifferent, and a thumbs down if it is not an example of feeling indifferent. The first one says, Maria's friends are arguing about whether to go to the mall or see a movie. When they ask Maria what she thinks, she genuinely doesn't have a preference. Either option sounds fine to her, and she'd be just as happy with one or the other. Okay, so indifferent means not caring too much one way or the other. Is this an example of indifferent or a non-example? Good, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up. Example. Number 2, James sees a kid from his class getting mocked in the hallway. His stomach tightens and he feels angry about it, but he doesn't say anything because he's afraid the group might turn on him next. Good, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs down. This is more nuanced. Some students might put their thumb up. They might say, well, he was indifferent, he did nothing, right? And so then have that rich conversation. That's actually a great marker that they're understanding the word indifferent, right? You might have feelings that are not indifferent, but you might choose not to show those feelings, right? And so have that rich conversation. That's a win. The why is always really important in these examples and non-examples. Number 3, during the student council election, most of the school doesn't bother voting. When asked why, students say things like, it doesn't matter. Nothing will change anyways. Good, indifference, good, excellent. Coach announces that tomorrow's practice is canceled. Deshaun pumps his fist in the air and says yes to his teammate. He's been exhausted all week and he's thrilled to get a break. Good, he's definitely not indifferent. He's feeling really happy about that, right? And number 5, when the teacher asks the class whether they want to take the quiz on Thursday or Friday, Amir says, I don't care, in a flat voice, but inside he's panicking. He desperately needs it to be on Friday, so he has more time to study, and he's terrified somebody else will choose Thursday. Good, he's not feeling indifferent, right? Now inside, he's feeling really panicked, right? That means he's not indifferent, because indifference is about how we're feeling. All right, so that's one kind of example, non-example. Things I like about this, let me be clear. I like starting with examples, non-examples, because it does not require a verbal response from students. It lets them participate in relatively low stakes settings, right? They get to participate and reflect on these words. What I'm also doing is providing 5 models of how that word, how I could think about that word. 5 different situations that word indifferent might or might not apply to. But I'm at this point not even using the word, right? I'm just having students reflect on the meaning. I'm really testing their understanding of that student-friendly definition. Another kind, right? I could give 2 different kind of scenarios or 2 different pairs of examples, and I could have students tell me, does example 1 or example 2 better reflect the word profound, right? And so let's go back for a minute to our definition of profound. This is what I do with students. If something is profound, it is so deep and meaningful that it makes you stop and reflect. So now I'm going to come here to my scenarios. Pair A, we're thinking about if something is so deep and meaningful that it makes you stop and reflect. Which one of these would make you do that? Your favorite restaurant closes down and you have to find a new place to get pizza? Or your best friend moves to another state and you realize how much you took your time together for granted? Which one is more profound? Good, excellent. Unless pizza's a very important thing to you, right? And so these are times like, hey, let's recognize we're working with adolescents. If you had somebody who shot up their hand and said, but miss, pizza's really important to me, right? And again, then you could say, well, like, probably not as important as your very best friend, but I like the joke, right? It is showing they're understanding that. Let them be a little snarky, right? These are times for that. Pair B, reading a book that completely changes how you see yourself and makes you want to be a different kind of person. Or 2, reading a book that's entertaining and fun, but you forget about it a week later. What I like about these, I won't belabor it and go through the last ones, but what I like about these are you can make them as nuanced or as obvious as you need to. I start with more obvious examples and I become more nuanced as I go to make sure students understand the boundaries under which that definition works, right? And that can kind of encourage a high level of success in the beginning and then help students narrow and come up with a more precise understanding of the word as you go. All right, so you all work with your tables. You're going to work on coming up with an example, non-example. I don't care whether you give 2 pairs and ask which one is the example of a word, or you say thumbs up, thumbs down, but come up with one for the word injustice, something that's deeply unfair. So I think a couple things to note here. And I kind of did some eavesdropping. I heard some good conversations about like, what would a high schooler think an injustice was, right? Because that's the right answer. We want examples and non-examples that are relatable to students. That's what they're going to remember, right? So if you can work in, like, if you have Swifties in the class, like if you could work that into examples, perfect, right? Whatever it is that you can do to kind of suck in your students and get them engaged in the lesson can be helpful. As students get better and they develop a deep and precise understanding, students can come up with examples and non-examples and quiz their partners to have them think of one, right? But we want to make sure before we do that that they have a deep and precise understanding of these words so that they actually have one that represents an example and one that represents a non-example. So that's a listening activity, right? How we build deep and precise vocabulary knowledge is we practice using and encountering these words across listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So now I'm going to go on to some speaking examples. Obviously, we don't just want students to understand the definition. We want them to be able to use these words. And so I'm going to give you a turn and talk prompt. You all can pretend to be my students for a minute. You can turn and talk to your partner, but I want you to use the word indifferent in your response. And so I want you to think about something you used to care about that now you feel indifferent toward. Maybe a TV show, a hobby, or even a friendship. Tell your partner what changed. In your response, explain why you're now indifferent when you weren't before. If a sentence starter would help, you can say, I used to care about blank, but now I feel indifferent because. Go ahead and get started. Think about a decision that happens at school, like where to sit at lunch or which elective to take. Describe a situation where you might feel indifferent about the choice. And again, I provided a sentence starter. I would feel indifferent about blank because. Or the third prompt, share an example with your partner of a time when indifference could lead to a negative outcome, right? Being indifferent can cause problems when. And so we won't practice being students anymore today, right? But you guys, the key here is we're getting students using the words in their oral vocabularies. They need to practice using that word so that they can own it, right? And we're giving them different situations to consider. I'm providing a context under which to discuss that word, a context where they have some choice here that's relatable to them, but that, that word is now becoming used in a way that they could then use it again in the future because that situation was relatable to them, and they can now think of a particular context or situation in which that word applies. So students can also be prompted to use multiple vocabulary words. Let's say you've taught indifference, injustice, and profound. And so after listening to the prompt, students could turn and talk to a partner to answer the prompt using both vocabulary words in their response. So thinking about how vocabulary words relate to each other. So the prompt 1 is called the cheating boyfriend or girlfriend, and let all the students go, ooh, right? Like, that's great. Finding out that someone you trusted cheated on you can feel like a deep injustice. You gave your loyalty and they betrayed it. Some people respond with anger, while others eventually feel indifference toward their ex. Talk with your partner. Which response do you think is healthier in the long run? Staying angry about the injustice or reaching a point of indifference, and why? I'll let you guys answer that. All right, and so of course I'd go through multiple examples, right? Because some students will relate to some better than others. And so, prompt 2 might say, practicing hard but not making varsity. right? Imagine you spent all summer training for a sport. You showed up early, you stayed late, and you worked harder than ever before. When the roster is posted, your name isn't on it. The injustice stings, especially if you feel outworked, especially if you feel you outworked people who made the team. This moment could have a profound effect on you, but in what direction? Talk with your partner. How might the experience change someone in a profound way, either positively or negatively? How would you make sure the injustice doesn't define you? Right? We could talk about that. That would relate to a very different type of student, right? I'm particularly honing in to adolescent students' interests, but making sure I'm hitting multiple students' interests. And so for the sake of time, I'm going to keep going. We've done listening and speaking, right? We also need to target reading and writing. And so reading, AI is really good at coming up with these, by the way, you guys, but reading can create closed passages where you have to figure out which of the vocabulary words best completes each passage. So let's do it aloud as a group. You guys will just fill in the word for me. When Jalen saw a group of students mocking a classmate with a disability in the cafeteria, he felt a blank sense of anger. Profound sense of anger rise in his chest. He knew what was happening was wrong, a clear injustice that nobody deserved. But when he looked around, most students just kept eating and scrolling through their phones, acting as though nothing was happening. Their indifference bothered Jalen almost as much as the cruelty itself. He realized that staying silent made him part of the problem. That moment changed him in a profound way. He decided that ignoring wrongdoing was its own kind of injustice. From that day forward, he promised himself he wouldn't let blank be his response, indifference be his response when someone needed an ally. And so just a way to have students multiple times fill in those words. You don't have to have more than 3 words to have students practice more than 3 times, right? Or you could provide a reading comprehension passage. Students read the whole passage, right? I can relate this to another deep injustice that's happened in society. From 1619 to 1865, millions of African people were kidnapped from their homes and forced into slavery in the United States. Enslaved people were treated as property rather than human beings. They were bought and sold, separated from their families, and forced to work without pay under brutal conditions. Enslaved people had no legal rights. They could not vote, testify in court, or legally marry. Despite these horrors, many Americans in the North and South looked the other way, choosing not to challenge a system that built wealth for white landowners. Even people who personally found slavery disturbing often remained silent because speaking out was uncomfortable or risky. The impact of slavery did not end in 1865 when it was abolished. Its effects shaped laws, economics, education, and attitudes about race for generations that followed. Understanding this history is essential for making sense of ongoing conversations about inequality in America today. I could ask questions that include these vocabulary words now, right? How did the indifference of ordinary Americans allow slavery to continue for so long? What might have been different had people refused to stay silent? Or what forms of injustice did enslaved people experience? Identify at least 2 specific examples from the passage and explain why each one was unjust. Or why do you think the impact of slavery has been so profound, lasting for generations even after it officially ended? Right? And so we can have students deeply reflect on these words applied then to a different situation of injustice and expand and deepen their understanding. And finally, writing. We've done listening, speaking, reading, and writing, hitting all 4 areas of literacy, right? Sentence stems are incredibly helpful. One of the things that my adolescent students loved to do when I taught middle school was when I asked them to go write a sentence, they'd be like, he felt indifferent. And I'm thinking, period, end of sentence, right? And I'm thinking, well, I mean, it's not wrong, but I have no idea if you understand what the word indifferent means, right? And so if instead I provide a sentence stem and I ask students to complete my sentence, they have to demonstrate an understanding of the word. And so my sentence stem can include the word indifferent. I want to be clear, I'm not providing a close activity where they're just writing the word indifferent into a sentence, right? Instead, what I'm doing is providing a beginning of a sentence. Many people show indifference toward the use of animals in circuses, zoos, and marine parks because, right? Or some students believe that banning cell phones in school is an injustice because, right? Or not being able to read can have a profound impact on someone's life because. right? We have to understand those words to complete those sentences. Students are having to do much deeper thinking than just filling in their own sentence that has, he is blank, right? And then finally, we can use these extended writing prompts. So students can go beyond just writing a single sentence. And I can provide an interesting premise and have students write about that premise using all 3 vocabulary words. And so imagine you just started 10th grade and one of your teachers clearly has favorite students. These few students get treated better than the rest of the class. Generate an extended writing prompt that you could ask students to write about that requires them to use all 3 vocabulary words: indifferent, injustice, and profound. And it could be related to this, right? That's one prompt. You could do a totally different prompt, right? But finding something that's relatable to students, where students are having to do some more extended writing and think about how these words relate to each other. In this case, these words are very related. It's easy to come up with ways, but I want to be clear. Someone could shout out 2 random words to prove it. Anyone over here willing to give me a tier 2 vocabulary word? Just shout out a random one. Say it again. Analyze. Analyze, good. And someone over here, a different one. Synthesize, good. And so I can relate those to each other. Those ones are pretty easy because they actually relate pretty closely to each other. But if I analyze 2 different texts, then I can synthesize the information I learned across all of them, right? You can compare, and students can come up with 2 ways words relate to each other. They don't have to be related in any way. I want to be clear, right? I mean, I could think of profound and I could think of minute, right? And those are opposites from each other in some ways, right? Or they could serve as opposites. I could think of something having a profound impact on me, or maybe something that's an injustice should have a profound impact on me, but the impact felt rather minute, because it wasn't a topic I cared about a lot, right? I can think about how those words relate, and you can do that on the fly. All right, so finally, after I've built that deep knowledge, I can return to this passage. And I can find this. This speech was called The Perils of Indifference. And I might want to define for students that perils means dangers, the dangers of indifference. And so, now I might ask students, why do you think Elie Wiesel named his speech The Perils of Indifference? The dangers of indifference. That would be a really great discussion question to have right after teaching these words deeply, right? Now students know what indifference means. All right, so, here, comprehension questions that go with this speech, right? Let's say you've talked about it on a deep level. Now we're going beyond just vocabulary instruction. We're getting into that deep comprehension, knowing vocabulary drives comprehension. You cannot understand a passage when you do not know the meanings of the words. But to have these deep, rich conversations is what our ELA teachers are really good at. What they're not great at sometimes is getting the instruction down where students are prepared and ready for these deep discussions. And so we have to provide that robust academic vocabulary instruction before students are ready for these types of experiences. And I want to end with Anita Archer. I was excited to hear she came. So a video from Anita Archer teaching some words deeply. Let's watch her in action. I want you reflecting on what practices do you see Anita Archer using that reflect some of this deep and precise understanding we talked about today.
So, looking up here, so we're going to expand on some of our vocabulary words, and the first word is what, everyone? Discard. And part of speech, it is a verb. And read the definition. If you discard something, you get rid of it because you no longer want it or need it. Okay, so when I get rid of something and I throw it away, another word for that is what, everyone? Discard. In fact, the synonym is what, everyone? Throw away. So if I clean up this room, as you two did this morning, you cleaned it up, and they found some paper and some pencils that needed to be thrown away. They did what, everyone? They discarded them. Okay, and so looking here, and read it with me, everyone, and starting here. What are some things that you should discard? Okay, and so everybody be thinking for a moment of your bedroom and some things that you need to discard. And begin by saying what, everyone? I should discard. My turn first. So I have a basement that is just filled with old books that no one wants. It's filled with overhead transparencies that teachers don't use. I need to, what everyone? Discard them. I have cards. Every card that's been sent to me, I'm 64, every card that's been sent to me since I was like 5 years old, I have kept. And I have boxes and boxes of them, and I probably should discard them. Okay, and so first ones, then twos. Tell your partner something that you should discard and start with, I should discard. First ones, then twos, and go.
Mm-hmm. I should discard old papers.
Absolutely.
I should discard my clothes out on use and give it to charity.
Excellent. Okay, looking up here, and big voice your sentence.
I should discard my clothes out on use to charity.
Excellent. So you're not going to just throw them away. You're going to discard them, get rid of them, but they're going to go to charity. Excellent. Okay, well, looking here. And again, it's the word what, everyone? Discard. And read it with me. Brainstorm with your partner what might be discarded in a landfill. And continue. Count the number of ideals that you list. Okay, my turn first. So things that could be discarded in a landfill. Food that is rotten, old papers, a toaster that's broken might be discarded in a landfill. Old letters, old cards, clothes that are all ripped up. Okay. Looking with your partner and count as you go, say as many as you can, things that might be discarded in a landfill, and go with your partner.
Broken things.
Broken things?
Things that don't work.
Things that don't work?
Things that work.
Things that work? You're going to discard them?
Things you don't wear.
Things that you don't wear anymore?
Paintings.
Paint, yeah.
Clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Food. Tissue.
Mm-hmm.
Toys, old toys.
Excellent. So we're going to do whip around or pass, meaning I'm going to start here and you're going to say one thing that might be discarded in a landfill. And so what might be discarded in a landfill? Your plastic.
Oh my gosh, you stole me.
I'll be back. And old toys.
Old computers.
Old computers.
Paper.
Paper, books. What? Clothing. TVs. So, rotten food, yes. Okay, I'll think about it. I'll be back. What?
What was I gonna say? Trash.
Trash. Excellent. And back to you.
Glass.
Glass. Excellent. Those are all things that might be discarded.
All right, you get an idea, right? This instruction goes far beyond just providing that brief incidental, one student-friendly definition and one model, then moving on and expecting students to be able to work with that. So what's different about this approach? What would you guys say? What's different about this approach? More times to practice, more repetitions, right? What else? Meaningful interactions, right? I'm picking things I think might be meaningful to students.
It doesn't just keep the word in text, it brings it to life and then brings it back to
Yeah, so I'm going to real life, coming back to the text, going back to real life, right? Good. Anything else? Excellent. So, that's the key here. What I want to do is take a break. When we come back, we're going to go on with multisyllabic word reading. So let's take a break. I want to give time for everyone to use the restroom, so I'm flexible. But once you are ready and you've gotten a drink, use the restroom, just have a seat again so I know we're all ready to go, okay? While on break, I had some really thoughtful questions that are worth me talking about. And so I think key takeaways, things I really wanted you to know. Source these words from the complex text students are reading. I came over here and a great question was, how do my teachers find the time to do this? And so remember, not all of this has to be done at once. I'm modeling it all at once because I have 3 hours with you today and then I go home, right? But for your teachers, they can do 5 minutes on Monday. Pick a different vocabulary activity. Loop back to the same words on Tuesday. That's how words are retained over time. Remembering they need 12 to 16 exposures to a word to begin to master that word. It never hurts to go beyond there, particularly if we're talking about our students with language difficulties or disabilities or our English learners, right? They might need even more exposures. And so hitting this for 5 or 10 minutes in a class, coming back to it the next day, pick a different vocab activity, 5 or 10 more. It's a really good, those extended writing prompts are great bell starters, right? You know, something on the board ready for students to do, or sentence stems are really great bell starters too, right? Anything to kind of get students thinking about the vocabulary words you've learned. Remembering, this goes beyond vocab instruction. Good vocabulary instruction promotes great critical thinking, right? And so we're going beyond just vocab instruction to help students become good critical reasoners. So source those vocab words from the complex texts. If you're an interventionist, if you guys, any of you are coaching special education teachers, have them go to the content area teachers. Pick a text students are reading in science or social studies over the course of the week, because those are texts students will encounter again. You can preview and teach it before that's taught, or you can do it after, looping back, knowing that content was important and my students likely didn't master it from the brief instruction that happened. So now I'm moving on to multisyllabic words. We are talking about a flexible strategy, and then we're talking about sourcing these words from the complex text students are reading. If we use a flexible strategy, we can source the words from those complex texts. And so one of the problems I see with multisyllabic word reading instruction is that we get so into these rules that then we present words in isolation to students, and every single word has to adhere to the rules, otherwise they wouldn't be on the paper. And what I find from this is students get better when they're in intervention, but then they go back to their regular classrooms and they can't generalize the knowledge that they've learned, and it doesn't actually help them read texts that are authentic in more accurate or fluent ways. And so I'm going to present a solution to that today, right? We don't want this context-independent decoding. Of course, students do need practice reading words in isolation, right? If they struggle with multisyllabic word reading, yes, they're going to need some practice reading those words in isolation, and then reading the words in sentences, and then reading them within a passage. But I don't want to control text so heavily that students don't learn to be flexible, because that's one of the things we do have to do, right? When I think about these rules where, you know, I find my vowels and I mark them, and then I draw a bridge between the vowels and I count how many consonants, and then there's these rules for how I divide, right? Like I said, they work great for some students. If they're working, keep going with it, right? I'm not trying to stop anything that's already working. What I'm trying to say is some students don't have really strong, what I would call cognitive processing skills, particularly our students with disabilities. It is very rare that a student has a learning disability and doesn't also have weaknesses across either attention, working memory, or processing speed. Most of our students with learning disabilities have difficulties across at least one of those areas. If I want to sort of break out what that means, if students have weaknesses across those areas, attentionally, I think about our students, they have to ignore every distraction happening in a classroom to zero in on what's most important. They also need to ignore all the things that happen with teachers of like, now I'm talking about something unrelated and I'm cracking a joke, but that joke's not really related to instruction. I'm just trying to engage students, and then I'm coming back. Can I zero in on what's most important, right? That takes attention. Working memory, I think of like a sticky note for the brain. Can you hold information very temporarily in your brain while you're also having to think about many other things? That's what comprehension is, right? Can you hold on to the information you're reading about while you continue to read the rest of the passage, and then come back and at the end remember what you read about in the beginning, right? And then processing speed. And all of these, I want to be clear, happen in tandem. If you have poor working memory and you don't hold on to information well, and you also have a slow processing speed, well, now you have to hold on to that information for even longer, right? Which is only going to be more challenging for you. And so these cognitive skills make some of that strategy instruction where we find the vowels. We have all these rules for we divide between the two consonants if there's two, and if there's 3 or 4, we look for the consonant digraphs and the consonant blends. You guys know the rules, right? You've probably heard them. That's a lot of rules. And of course, the more rules I add, the more accurate decoding becomes, but the more I'm also taxing working memory, right? And the more my students who have slow processing speeds are going to struggle to enact those rules really proficiently and quickly. And we have to remember the goal of this kind of instruction is that students learn to read words accurately and efficiently. In fact, a controversial statement, but I'll go ahead and say it and say that if students can't read words efficiently, why are we even bothering to teach them to decode? They won't understand what they read anyways, right? And I don't mean we don't work on it, right? I want to be clear. There's a process, right? Students go through this process. They might not be efficient right away, right? But if they don't eventually get to automaticity, they still won't comprehend the text, and then that's the whole point of reading, right? That's the ultimate goal. And so we need to remember these strategies don't work for everybody and use a more flexible approach. We can source words from the text. That means the words are more authentic. They might not perfectly follow the rules. That's okay. I'll show you what to do with that, right? And then second, when we source them from the passage, they're getting practice reading the words that they're going to encounter when they're engaged in complex text reading. I wanted to pull out a word that doesn't perfectly follow the rules just to demonstrate. You look at this word constitution. Those of you who live in the reading multisyllabic word world, what kind of syllable would I call STI? Open. It ends with a vowel. Does that vowel make its, does it say its name? Does it make its long vowel sound? No. And so if a student tried to decode that word and said constitution, right, then would they get to the correct pronunciation? It wouldn't be totally correct. Is it close enough? Most students would be able to kind of tweak it and keep going? Yeah. And so I want to be clear. The goal here isn't to be able to name each syllable type. That never was the goal, even of the other type of instruction, right? The goal is to get to accurate and efficient word reading. And so we're going to talk about a more flexible approach today. So first, there's some prerequisite skills students need to have. And I have to cover this, otherwise teachers go out there ready to teach multisyllabic word reading and their students aren't ready for it, and it goes poorly really quickly, right? But students need to be able to read one-syllable words that include all of the different vowel sounds. And so vowel sounds, there's lots of them, right? It's not as easy as, do I know A, E, I, O, U, the long and the short, right? Do I know that single vowels can make their short vowel sound? We call those closed syllables, right? For those of you who don't live in that world. Do I know that single vowels can make their long vowel sound? And we call these open syllables. They end in a vowel, right? And then those vowels make their long vowel sound. Do I know that when there is a vowel followed by a single consonant followed by the letter E, the first vowel is going to make its long sound and the E is silent? That silent E rule. Do I know that when a vowel is followed by the letter R, that it makes a new sound? AR says R, ER, IR, and UR say and OR generally says or, unless it's followed at the end and indicates someone's job or profession, and then we say right, like doctor. We don't go around doctor, right? But do I know all of these rules? Can I read these words, right? And I don't even like to call these rules because that's not really what phonics skills are, right? They're patterns, right? Do I know all of these patterns? Do I know those predictable vowel teams, the ones that tend to make the same sounds, like OA says O or AI and AY say A? Can I decode words with those unpredictable vowels, like the EA I demonstrated earlier? Can I decode, have I learned that EA makes multiple sounds, and can I differentiate between those to make words that make a word that's a part of my oral vocabulary, that semantics comes into play, right? Do I know my diphthongs, a fancy way to say those whiner sounds, right? The oys and the ahs and the oohs, right? They're kind of whiny. And then unstressed schwas, that kind of sound, right? And so if students can't recognize single syllable words with all of these kinds of vowel sounds, they're going to have a really hard time decoding multisyllabic words. It doesn't mean we can't jump into some multisyllabic decoding, right? If I've done a little mini lesson and I'm working with secondary students and I've just taught that OW can say ow and OU can say ow, well, I might be starting with some single syllable words, but then I might quickly dive right back into two syllable words and make sure that they can go there, and I might jump back and forth a little bit because it's important we're getting students the exposure to the complex text that they're going to be expected to read and understand. And so the last bit of little knowledge is syllable types, right? Syllable types is another set of knowledge, and I want to be clear, there's knowledge for teachers and there's knowledge for students, right? Syllable types I would consider teacher knowledge. This doesn't hurt students to learn it. If they can learn it, great. I'm not quizzing them on can they recite these rules, right? That's what I don't want to get into. Sometimes I'll see these rule decks come into play where like the rule is shown and students are literally reciting these rules and seeing can they recite them from memory. And I always think it's a little off track with what we're trying to get to, right? We're trying to get to students reading words accurately and efficiently. And so I like the acronym COVERS. Other people will say CLOVER, right? There's all sorts of acronyms, but a closed syllable, open syllable, vowel team syllable, silent E, R-controlled, and stable final syllable. So let's go through each one just to make sure we have an understanding, because if we don't, it would be confusing why vowels make the sound that they make. And so a closed syllable is any syllable, a one-syllable word that has a single vowel, followed by one or more consonants, and the vowel is going to make its short vowel sound for the most part. And so, words that are single syllable like mat or check, I have one vowel followed by one or more consonants, the T in mat or the CK in check, and in each one of those words, the vowel makes its short vowel sound, ah or eh. I can take two-syllable words like napkin. Each one of those syllables is a closed syllable. The vowels are short because they're followed by a consonant. Or fantastic. My first graders who had dyslexia were so proud when they learned to read fantastic, a 9-letter word, right? And if you can read 3 CVC words, you can decode it. So give me a thumbs up, thumbs down for each one. Is each one of these words closed syllable? Chip. Yes, one vowel followed by the consonant P, and I says eh. What about high? Good. Tap. Great. Stitch. Excellent. Wrath. Pro. Good. Flee. And brain. Good. And so brain is a tricky one because brain has a vowel in the middle here, followed by a consonant, but is that vowel making its short vowel sound? No, and it's because it's 2 vowels there, right? And so we haven't gotten there yet, so don't worry if you answered that incorrectly. You were just thinking, hey, I see a consonant at the end, right? Great, we'll get there. Open syllables. So open syllables end in a vowel. The vowel, because it's not followed by a consonant, then makes its long vowel sound. And so, here, no, go, high, right? We can all read those words, but we might not have known why the vowel was long. It's long because those words end in a vowel. And then a multisyllabic word like halo. Both of those are open syllables. Every syllable ends in a vowel, and it makes its long vowel sound. So, thumbs up, thumbs down. Open syllables, match. Good, it's closed syllable, right? We, open. Bond, closed. She, open. Rock, closed. Beak. Good. Beak is not an open syllable, even though it makes its long vowel sound, right? Because it ends in a consonant. We still haven't gotten here yet, right? Swift. Good. Closed. And fly. Good. Remembering Y can be a vowel, right? It also can be a consonant, but Y can be a vowel. It can make its long sound. Vowel team syllables. 2 or more vowels that work to make one vowel sound. And so these might be vowel teams that make like long or short sounds, like EA can say E or eh. Or they might be our diphthongs, our whiners, right? Those ows and oohs and ahs. And so, here I can say break has a vowel. EA makes the A sound there. That's my vowel team syllable. Couch, that's the ow. It's one of my whiners, right? It makes the ow sound. And then I have rainbow. Each syllable is a vowel team syllable, right? I hear the AI say A and the OW say O there. All right, so stew. Good. Band. Dry. Green. Clown. Dream. Stomp. Good. What kind of syllable is stomp? Closed. Good. Main. Excellent. You guys got it. Vowel consonant E, and I want to be clear, I don't teach these to students like this, right? This would be a lot of information. Vowel consonant E. So when there's a vowel followed by a consonant, a single consonant, followed by the letter E is silent and the vowel is long, which I tell students that means it says its name, right? The vowel says its name. In the word make, this A is going to say its name. It's going to say A, and the E is silent. Ache. Bribe, same thing. E is silent. I is going to say I. Limestone, multisyllabic word where both of the parts of the word, both of the syllables are vowel consonant E's. Someone shout out a vowel consonant E syllable for me from my choices here. Stove. Stove. What's another? Slide and cage and tube. You guys got it. Good. R controlled. So when a vowel is followed by the letter R, the vowel is going to work with the R to make a different sound. It doesn't make its long or its short sound. It's going to make a new sound. AR says R, ER, IR, and UR say like in fern, firm, and fur. OR says or, and a word like corner. Both syllables are R-controlled vowels. What are my R-controlled words here? Storm, northern, both syllables there, right? Burn, good, excellent, you guys. And then the last one, stable final syllables or final stable syllable. This is a consistent spelling pattern that comes at the end of a word. And so they produce consistent, reliable pronunciations. And yet, oftentimes, I can't ask students to go sound them out. If I told a student to go sound out T-I-O-N, shun, I mean, they're going to be lost, right? I can't sound it out. Same with like the ending A-G-E. We don't pronounce that age, right? Instead, it's just udge. And so, we have these parts of words here. And, here, obviously, suffrage comes into play, fusion, there's those endings, right? Future, that chur ending. And so, we have these parts of words we just have to recognize. And so, identifying syllable types, mixed practice. Predict, syllable type for pre, shout it out. Open, dict, closed, good. Solution, so. Lu, shun. Stable, good. Capture, cap, closed, chur. Good. Formulate, form, you, late. Good, you guys got it. So I won't belabor it, right? So all of this just to say, we have to know that students have these prerequisite skills. They don't need to be able to name every syllable type, but they need to be able to read those different parts of words. If they can't, they're not ready. A flexible pattern, rather than having all of these different rules for vowels and consonants, just says, number 1, circle your prefixes and suffixes. Oh, I love it when things get renumbered for me. Number 2, underline remaining vowels, right? Number 3, read syllable by syllable. And number 4, read it fast, right? That's what I tell students. And it's important. Sometimes teachers forget this last step. It's important to get there. You might think to yourself, it's really obvious when a student says prediction, that then they're going to know that's prediction. But it doesn't mean that, right? They could have decoded each one of those. They still need to blend the syllables together. And so for this example, prediction, circle the prefixes and suffixes. I always tell teachers here, don't get too hung up on, in this word, is it really a prefix or a suffix? If a student circles a part of a word and it represents a whole syllable, great, they've broken apart part of the word. They're well on their way to decoding it, right? So circle the prefixes and suffixes. Now all that's left is that DIC in the middle. Underline the remaining vowels. I see a vowel I there, right? I'm going to underline it. Now I can look, DIC, what kind of syllable type is this in the middle of my word? Closed. So that tells me something about how I'm going to read it. This vowel is going to be short because it's followed by a consonant. Now I'm going to read syllable by syllable, prediction, then read it fast, prediction, right? And so we can go through that process. What I like about it is a set of 4 steps students have to learn, but those are the only 4 they have to learn. It can now apply to any single word they encounter. If a student here made a mistake and said prediction, is it close enough they're going to figure out the word? For most students, the answer is yes, right? And so what we're really teaching students to do here is to take their best attempt at breaking up this word and to learn to be flexible, because that's what they have to do when they come to an unfamiliar word in a connected text. They need to learn to be flexible. All right, factoring. What am I going to do first? Shout it out. Circle prefixes and suffixes. I see that ing ending. I'm going to circle it. Then I'm going to underline my remaining vowels. What are my vowels in this word? A and OR, the R-controlled vowel. I'm going to read syllable by syllable. And so this is where I tell students, every syllable has a vowel. That helps me break it apart, right? And so I still don't have all the answers here. Like, I have some choices. Do I say fact or ring? Do I say factoring? Or do I say factor, right? And so I have some choices here. It's not perfect, but here I find it very hard to pronounce that if I break it after the A. So I already know that seems wrong, which is going to lead me to either saying factoring or saying fact or ing. Am I going to come to the correct pronunciation either way? Let's read it syllable by syllable. Factoring. Read it fast. Factoring, right? And so we can go through that process. You could come here and source the words from the complex text students are reading. This could be a precursor to asking students to read this text aloud before we dive into our repeated reading routines. I could practice doing some of this multisyllabic word reading, right? I could come through, I could first identify the 2-syllable words. I might want to start there. Can my students accurately and efficiently read those 2-syllable words, right? Words like perils, members, mountains, Jewish, witness, right? Then I can go on, I can pick those 3-syllable words. President, liberated, compassion, I can already see some of those stable final syllables pulling up, right? And so here you can go through, you can practice, right? Students can have a cue card in front of them that tells them the steps. They'll only need it a couple times because there's only 4 steps, and then they get really good. And really the only thing they need to remember is prefixes, suffixes, vowels, read it, right? Prefixes, suffixes, vowels, read it. And so, you know, I pulled out the words here. The interesting thing about complex multisyllabic words is they also tend to be our tier 2 vocabulary words. And so it's really fascinating how when we practice one, it helps with the other, right? I would probably start with some good old multisyllabic word reading if I thought students knew the meaning of words. But if they don't, remembering meaning comes into play. We read words more accurately and efficiently if we know what they mean. And so starting with some good vocabulary instruction can even help students read these words more effectively. And so again, circle the prefixes and suffixes, underline the remaining vowels, read them syllable by syllable: indifference, profound, injustice, and then read them fast: indifference, profound, injustice, right? And so can students go through and do this? And so, you know, after I've really targeted those words, made sure students understand how to break words apart, I might have lists of words. In fact, these are the 2-syllable and 3-syllable words from my passage. And I might have some sort of beat the clock activity where students are reading a set of 10 words or so, and they're going to practice with a partner reading those words. Their partner is going to be timing them. If timing makes students nervous, what I always tell teachers is just go to accuracy. The next time, try to be more accurate, right? Some students feel pressure under time. If that's throwing them off, move on to accuracy. But timing is a good indicator of efficiency of word reading. And so, you know, can students go through, read this list? They mark how long it took them to read the list, how many seconds, and then they color how many words did they get correct. I try to partner students up. I use these a lot in general education classrooms, where what we would suggest for partnering students is numbering your students in some sort of order that indicates their strength as a reader. It doesn't have to be super precise at this point. Teachers are aware enough they can pretty quickly kind of generate an order. Split your group in half, partner the very top in group 1 with the very top in group bottom, right? And so split them in half. That way, it's never the very strongest reader reading with the very weakest reader. Everybody has a clearly stronger partner who can read first and who could provide some corrective feedback, but nobody's so frustrated by somebody being at such a different level than them that it's sort of unmanageable for them. And then, of course, switching up groups. So, you know, after I do that multisyllabic word reading, then I might go and I might find phrases within this passage that students could practice reading. I can practice fluency at multiple different levels. I can practice reading at the phrase level. A young Jewish boy from a small town in a place of. If you have those students who are reading word by word by word, having them group and chunk text into phrases can be helpful. Then practicing some sentence reading. And so for here, I think what I did was pick out my vocabulary words, and I chose the sentences that included those words, knowing those were multisyllabic words and words students needed to be able to read accurately and efficiently. And then finally, diving into some repeated reading, which I'm not going to belabor because you guys can go find videos of it online if you're not familiar with those procedures. But partnering students up. One of the things about adolescents is they love to work with each other. So let them work with each other, partner them up. Have students, one be the stronger reader, the other one be the weaker reader. Stronger reader always reads first. They're going to read a paragraph. Partner B is going to follow along. And then they're going to switch roles. Partner B is going to read the same paragraph. Partner A is going to follow along and provide corrective feedback. You know, I like for my adolescents, repeated reading needs to feel a little different than it did in 3rd grade, right? Because otherwise they just look at you like, why am I reading it again? I just read it, right? And so if I provide a purpose for each repeated reading, then there's something to do. They don't question it anymore because they're like, oh, well, we're doing it because we're going to answer the comprehension question, right? And so it can be as simple as underlining the unknown vocabulary words, writing a main idea statement, answering a comprehension question that comes after. This would be a great time to come back to your vocab, ask a question that includes one of your vocabulary words, right? That could be a great way to do it. Things I want to talk about this video. So she does a really nice job of using the flexible strategy. She posts the rules, right? Circle the prefixes and suffixes, underline the vowels, and then read part by part, read it fast. After she posts those rules, she goes through several examples. They're examples where students have to be a little flexible. They're not all perfect examples of the exact syllable types that she's clearly taught to students. And finally, she dives into spelling. So what the students do is name each syllable. They say the word syllable by syllable. So if it was prediction, prediction, right? Let's say it again slowly, prediction. How many syllables? 3. She draws 3 lines on her paper. That's a scaffold for your weakest spellers, right? Now let's spell each syllable. If you need to, tap the sounds in the syllable. Pre, p, e. Tap the sounds, pre, write it. Now dick, right? And so, you can go through part by part by part. And spelling, what I like about it is by integrating spelling within reading instruction, it's a window into where students are at in their knowledge of phonics, right? And so, when you ask students to spell these multisyllabic words, you see what have they acquired and what have they not acquired. If a student writes like S-I-O-N instead of T-I-O-N, it's a good win, right? Because it told me they heard that shun ending and they picked an ending that also could make the shun sound. Now, if instead they tried to spell that in a way where it didn't even represent every sound they heard, that would be more problematic. I now know I have a phonemic awareness challenge, right? I have to go on to different skills. Oh, you do? Okay, perfect. Yeah, that would be great.
Boys and girls, today during workshop, I will be working with Group C at the back table. Group C, I will need you to bring your whiteboard, marker, and whiteboard eraser. The rest of you, I need Group A, start with Lexia. Grab your Chromebook, jump on Lexia. You have cursive, you have science connections, you have Lexia, you have your June phone facts, and you need to cover your journal slips, okay? So again, if you have not done your 20 minutes of Lexia, start with that. If you already finished your 20 minutes of Lexia, jump on something else. Yes, sir? I will give you one right now. Any questions?
No.
Okay, get to work.
Okay, boys and girls, today we're going to be working on reading multisyllabic words, big words, okay? So I'm gonna actually have you guys read some prefixes for me. If I can get this to go in. These are prefixes. The first prefix says pre. What does it say?
Pre.
Pre. I want you to read these with me, okay? Here we go.
Dis, ex, re, sub,
Let's try this line.
sub, ex, pre, dis, re.
So when we are reading big words, we do have some rules that will help us make it easier for us to read, okay? So the flexible strategies for reading big words says that the first thing we should do when we see a big word is that we should circle the prefixes and the suffixes. After we do that, it says that we should underline the vowels in the uncircled part or parts of the word. After we do that, it has us read the word by parts or by syllables. And then the last thing it calls us to do is to read the whole word and confirm its pronunciation, right? So, looking at my rules, what is the first thing I should do?
Circle the prefix and suffixes.
Circle the prefixes and the suffixes. Okay, where can I find prefixes?
In the beginning or the end of the word.
At the beginning of a word. Okay, so if I look at this word, the prefix is pre. So I'm gonna circle pre. Then what should I do?
Circle the suffix.
I should circle the suffix. So let me look. Where can I find a suffix?
At the end of the word.
At the end of a word. Okay, so if I look at the end of the word, does this word have any suffix? A suffix?
No.
What's the suffix?
Shun.
Shin is a suffix. Good. So we circled our prefix, which is pre, and I circled my suffix, which is shin. Okay. So now I'm going to look at the second rule. It says to underline the vowels in the uncircled part of the word. Well, I didn't circle this part of the word, right? So let me look. I need to find the vowel. What's the vowel in this part? It's the letter E, right? So I should underline it? Okay. So now they want me to read the word parts or syllables. So here we go. Prevention. Now it has me read the whole word. Here we go.
Prevention.
Good. Prevention. Now, prevention is when we stop something from happening, right? So if it's a crime prevention, I'm stopping crime from happening, okay? Okay. Zachary, what should I do first?
Circle the prefixes or suffixes.
Okay, and again, prefixes come at the
Beginning of the word.
Okay, and what is the prefix in this word?
Re.
Re. Okay. And then I need to find the
Suffix.
suffix. The suffix comes at the
End of the word.
Okay, and what is the suffix in this word?
Shen.
Shen. What is the suffix?
Shen.
Okay, shen. Here we go. Now I have to.
Underline the vowels in the uncircled parts of the word.
Isaac, what is the vowel?
E.
Okay. Now is it going to say E or E? Consonant, vowel, consonant. So it's going to say it's short sound. Okay? Now we're going to
Read the parts. Read the word parts.
read the word in parts or
Syllables.
syllables. So here we go. The prefix and the suffix is going to be its own
Sound.
its own
Vowel.
syllable. Here we go.
Reception.
I heard some of you guys. Let's try that again.
Reception.
Good. Now number 4 calls me to read the word and confirm its pronunciation. Here we go.
Reception.
Good. What if I read the word like this? Reception.
So that is not
Then I would know I need to change it. I have to tweak it and make it short sound, right? Reception. Good. All right, guys. Now we're going to be doing dictation, so you can. I'm going to give you a word, but before you write it, I want us to sound it out. Okay? Here we go. The word is reflection. What's the word?
reflection.
Let's say that in syllables. Here we go.
Reflection.
Okay. I want you to slow down because I can't hear everyone. Here we go. Wait. Look at my fingers.
Reflection.
Let's try that again. The second part. Say it again. Good. Go ahead and write it down. What's the first part you heard? Re. And re is a suffix. It's a prefix. What comes after re?
Fleck.
What is it?
Fleck.
I hear it 3 of you. Fleck. And then the suffix is
End of word.
comes at the end of the word. And what is the suffix that you heard at the end of the word?
And shun.
Shun. Yep. Okay, when you're done, just cap your marker. That'll tell me you're ready. Almost done. Make sure you're reading the word while you're reading. Okay, let's start over here. Go ahead and read this for me. Good. Let's go ahead and read this. I want to say fle. What vowel is that? E. Go ahead and fix it. Hang on. Good. Let's try that again. Awesome. There we go.
Reflection.
Good. Make sure that looks like
Reflection.
perfect. What'd you do? I can't hear you.
I forgot to add the F.
You forgot to add the F. I like how you caught that yourself. Your prefixes. Awesome, let's read that.
Reflection.
Perfect, let's do that slower.
Reflection.
Perfect.
All right, so a way to see how by spelling you get to see where students are really at in their understanding, right? And you get to correct some of those errors. Now, imagine if this had come right after students had done some deep vocabulary instruction with reflection. If they could define the word reflect, all of a sudden decoding that word becomes a whole lot easier, right? Now we're talking about just adding the shun ending to the end of that. And so all of that just to say, what's different about this approach than the types of syllable division instruction you guys have seen? Someone shout out something. What's different? Less rules, yes. It helps our students who have poor working memories or slow processing speeds, who cannot hold on to so many rules or go through them really quickly, right? What else? Transferable, yeah. So it doesn't have to just include the single words that follow the pattern in the worksheet that then students go back to their classrooms and they don't know what to do with that information because it doesn't apply, right? Anything else worth noting? Smaller groups, yeah, so that's smaller group, right? But you could even do this in a larger group, right? There'd be no reason you couldn't. Students could partner up and they could circle the prefixes and suffixes together, yes?
There's a time she turned her voice off and like visualizing the segmenting.
Yes.
Sometimes you see like in intervention, the need to like overly explain or do the thinking for kids.
Yes.
Good about being like just a second behind you when they hit secondary.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like by letting them spell that and not correcting their error when they're in the middle of it, but letting them read back what they wrote. It was powerful, right? Yes.
It's flexible, it's empowering to the students,
Yeah.
and it really causes them to be more likely to dive into words than guessing around.
Yeah, I mean, do you really think your adolescents want to go and label their vowels and consonants on their page while everybody else is not doing that? The truth is that probably they're unlikely to do that even if it helps them, right? And so just a different approach. Like I said, if the other solution works for some students, great, keep going with it. This is a different approach to introduce for students for whom the other strategy is not that effective for. All right, do we need a break or should I keep going?
What time is lunch?
Probably about 45-ish minutes. Let's keep going, okay. All right, so I'm gonna end with taking the same complex text and talking about how we can teach students to find the main idea and write a brief summary of that text. Knowing we've now dove into the text, we know the vocabulary words, we're reading that text accurately and efficiently because we've covered those complex multisyllabic words and practiced some repeated reading. And now we're gonna dive in, find the main idea, and write brief summaries. So, yes, go ahead.
So, for example, the word predator, right? So you have the PRE, and students could look at that as a prefix.
Yep.
When really it's a closed syllable.
Yeah, it's a great example.
Do for that instead.
Yeah, well, and it's a time where if I was going to put that word up here, right? If I was going to come up here and say predator. All right, so let's say you come through and you used your strategy, right? You said to yourself, okay, great. I'm going to circle the prefixes and suffixes. Students are going to come here, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if they circled that and they circled pre. Then they're going to go through and they're going to try to read it part by part. What are they going to come to? Predator. And I'd say, does that make a word we know? Do you guys know what a predator is? That's what I say. And they're going to say no, right? And I said, oh, this word is tricky. And then I just provide the correction. I say that isn't actually a suffix there. I'm going to go ahead and make your circle go all the way around, right? And now, it's still not perfect, right? Yeah. Predator. Are they going to get close enough to know predator? Yes, that's probably going to get them close enough to get there. And so, not perfect strategy, right? There's times you can think of words where it goes wrong. But what I just tell students, if it doesn't make a word you know, usually what we have to flex is a vowel. That's where we usually have to flex. Those are the parts of the words that make unpredictable sounds. And so if we teach students to be really flexible with those vowels, they'll know to shift it, right? I tried pre, maybe that's not a prefix there. So maybe I'm going to try pre, right? Predator. And I can go through and still not perfect, right? But it doesn't, I mean, even the syllable division, I want to be clear, constitution, it's not perfect either, right? We end up with the same challenge where we just have to be flexible. And so no different than any other strategy, but really good question. All right, so I'm diving in now to this main idea and summarization. And so one of the problems is that in intervention, when students are struggling readers, we spend so long teaching them how to read the text that we never get back to what that text means, right? And we tend to provide interventions that are context independent, where students are reading words in isolation and they're not even having to think about what the text they're reading means, or they're reading texts that are so decodable that the meaning of them is kind of lost, right? There are these weird texts where Tim is tapping on the sill, right? Not the windowsill, but the sill, because we can't sound out window yet, right? And so tap, 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 Tal is tapping, right? And you're like, why is Tal tapping on the sill? Like, that's so weird, right? And so, you know, we get here and we spent so long doing that kind of instruction that we are not focusing on meaning. And so when students are asked to find the main idea, what I find with my struggling readers is they do one of two things. Either they frantically scan the text and they retell you everything that they can remember, or they pick out the very most interesting detail that captured their attention and they'll tell you that that is the main idea, right? That's what students do 100% of the time if they don't know how to identify the main idea. And the other thing is when students can't read the complex text that they're being expected to read and learn from, they're not only missing out on the disciplinary knowledge that they were expected to learn from that content area, but they're not able to write about those texts. And that's where instruction goes next, right? Students read and then we ask them to write about what they've learned about. And well, if they don't remember what they read about or they didn't understand it to start with, they can't write about it. And oftentimes that writing activity is what's supposed to kind of consolidate their memory about that disciplinary knowledge they were supposed to acquire. And so they've not only missed it the first time, now they miss their second chance at then kind of wrestling with those ideas through writing and kind of transferring that information from their short-term to their long-term memory. I think it's important to remember we do not talk about the cognitive science of learning enough. We remember things that we think about deeply and often. And so if students aren't writing about the things they are reading about, they will be unlikely to remember them. And so although these strategies take time to implement, they're a good bang for our buck, right? They're going to help students acquire that disciplinary knowledge. And so we can use explicit strategies. I want to be clear, the strategy is not magical, right? It's not some magical kind of silver bullet that's going to help students be able to identify the main idea. They still have to engage in the deep thinking of identifying what is the most important information. But it's going to give teachers a strategy where they remember that they need to practice these skills a lot, right? And they need to practice them within the context of authentic texts that students are expected to read and understand, that these things don't come easily. I'm going to teach you guys about a procedure called Get the Gist, which is just a fancy way to say find the main idea, and writing brief summaries. And so here's a QR code that links you to these resources. They come from the Meadows Center for Preventing Educational Risk out of UT Austin. I want to be clear, I did not develop these, but there is a Get the Gist cue card. And then there's a Get the Gist log that's provided both electronically if students are working on Chrome pads, or it's provided on a printed format if students are working pencil and paper. And so, you know, I provide these materials to students. The cue card tells them the steps for finding the main idea. I name who or what is this section about. Then I name the most important information about the who or the what. And then finally, I combine those two pieces of information, the who and the what and the most important part, to make a one-sentence summary. And I try to tell students 12 words or less. I might start off with 15 and work them down to 10, right? I really need students to be able to express themselves concisely, because if not, what you get are students who copy a sentence from the passage, right? And so if they have to express it in 10 words or less, you prevent them from copying a sentence usually. The log is just a place where they capture who or what's the most important information about the who or the what, and then write a 10-sentence summary. So I come here to this section, right? I can come to a section of text and I won't read it to us again, right? But if I took the first 2 paragraphs of this text, one of the things teachers need to do is chunk a text. And so this is the perils of indifferent speech that we heard earlier. And so if I chunked the first 2 paragraphs of this text, what it really is talking about is Elie Wiesel is introducing this idea that he was this young Jewish boy, right? And he's talking about how, you know, he was freed from Buchenwald and that he had a lot of gratitude for those folks that found him and showed compassion and rage. That was like there was kind of this lack of indifference being showed, and he was happy to see that, right? That he felt, you know, some hope at the fact that there was not this indifference being shown by the American soldiers that freed him. And so I can come here, I can say, well, who or what is this passage about? Well, I mean, this would take some conversation to get here. Because I could see some students telling you, who or what is the passage about? It's about a young Jewish boy, right? They might not make the connection that the young Jewish boy is Elie Wiesel, right? But you can get there. It's about Elie Wiesel. What's the most important thing from this part of the text? Well, the most important thing is he remembers his liberation and the soldiers' rage and compassion and expresses gratitude for America's humanitarian work, right? That's long, but I can consolidate it, right? And I admit in the beginning, I don't push students too much on length, right? But I can bring it together and I can say, well, I can write one sentence summary. Wiesel remembers liberation, soldiers' rage and compassion, and expresses gratitude for America's humanitarian work. One sentence summary of the most important part of that section, right? I could come in, I can read the next section. And so, you know, if I come through this section here without rereading this passage to you, right? He's really talking here about, well, okay, we're on the precipice of a new millennium, right? And when we're entering that, he's talking about this idea that there's all of these atrocities that have happened across the world, and then defines the word indifference, right? And talks about, like, what does this word indifference mean about these atrocities that have happened worldwide? And so I can come here, well, you know, who or what is it about? It's about the history of violence and tragedy, right? And you could just say it's about tragedy, right? So that would be fine. What's the most important thing about tragedy? Well, people have to think about what happens when others feel indifferent. That was the main takeaway from this, right? There's all these tragedies that happen, and people need to think about it. What I like about this strategy is you're going to have students answer different ways. One student's going to say the who or the what is tragedy, and the most important thing is it's important not to be indifferent about tragedy. That would be a great gist statement for this part of the passage. It's correct, right? They don't all have to sound the same way. Somebody else might say, well, it's about historical tragedies, and what's the most important thing? Indifference made people turn a blind eye. Also a great gist statement for this part of the passage, right? And so I like it because students can share their gists with each other. They can help each other refine their gists, but there's not one right answer here, right? And so now I have a second gist statement. World violence and tragedy requires thinking about the consequences of indifference, right? And so, you know, I won't belabor this, but I can go through. I now have a host of gist statements for this passage. I'll keep reading through them. Indifference is tempting, but dehumanizing and makes humanity meaningless. Indifference is more dangerous than hatred because it aids the oppressor. And indifference is both a sin and a punishment because bystanders abandoned prisoners in the Holocaust. The final gists are, despite knowing about the Holocaust, world leaders and people were indifferent. Despite the centuries' traumas, humanity has made progress and learned to intervene against injustice. And humans learning to reject indifference provides hope, but history repeating itself remains terrifying, right? And so I've got some gist statements there. And so you can take the Get the Gist cue card and this Get the Gist log. I can break that passage down as small as I need to have students write gist statements. If I'm first starting with gists, I work at the paragraph level, right? Can I make a gist for each paragraph? Oftentimes, students have an easier time with that because most paragraphs have a clear topic sentence, and that is the gist statement. They can rephrase it, right? And so if you start there, that's good. I quickly try to move with older students, particularly when I leave this sort of middle school grades into the secondary high school grades. I work into sections of text that share meaning, right? If there's a section of the text that's kind of chunked and meaningful together, I break it up that way. The larger the chunk of text, the harder it becomes to write a gist, particularly to write a gist that's 10 words or less, right? And so, you know, then you'd flip over your cue card, that link, that QR code will take you to the cue card. On one side, it's Get the Gist cues. On the other side, it's a brief summary cue card. You can take your main idea statements, your gist statements, and you can use those to write a brief summary. And so, you know, when we write a brief summary, first we need to introduce a topic sentence about what our writing is going to be about. The gist statements we already have serve as really great supporting details. And then usually in there somewhere, I have to kind of look at those. I can sometimes combine gist statements together. Sometimes gist statements can be repetitive, particularly if I'm kind of working on a speech, right? They could be repetitive because the speaker might be saying the same thing over and over again, really trying to drive that point home. But I can use those. I write a topic sentence. I use my gist as supporting details. And then I can rephrase my topic sentence as a concluding sentence. to make a complete paragraph. And so, of course, I'm not retelling everything I learned about the speech, but I am briefly recalling the most important takeaways from this speech. And so, here, if I was to write a topic sentence for Elie Wiesel's speech, right, in his 1999 speech, The Perils of Indifference, Wiesel urges people to reject indifference toward human suffering. And so that's a good old topic sentence. That's what his speech is about, right? And I might need to provide a prompting question for that topic sentence. Will you tell me why Elie Wiesel delivered this speech, right? And so in your topic sentence, you would want to tell me that. Then I have some work to do. Now I have supporting details. Well, I've laid out, here are my gist statements to the side. Students will have those in front of them on a log. I have to decide how I'm going to kind of group those gist statements. This is a lot of supporting details. If I were to include each one of these, this would be a really long paragraph. But I can come through and I can do some work to think about, well, which of these gists are sort of related to each other? And so I did some of that thinking just to model what this would look like. And I would want to model this for students. Then they could do the work on their paper. But in here, what I think to myself is, well, the first sentence seems to be a good supporting detail that I just wanted to leave by itself. Wiesel still remembers being liberated from Buchenwald, thankful for American soldiers' rage and compassion. I left that sentence alone. I liked it. The next three gists I looked at and I thought, man, those really relate. And so let me read them so we can think about how. World violence and tragedy requires thinking about the consequences of indifference. Indifference is tempting but dehumanizing and makes humanity meaningless. And indifference is more dangerous than hatred because it aids the oppressor. And I read each one of those gists and I thought to myself, they all are sort of centered on this topic of indifference. Right? And so could I find a way to sort of combine those together? And I said here, he discusses world violence and tragedies, recognizing that indifference is easy, but has the terrible consequence of rejecting humanity and aiding the oppressor. Right? And so in there, if students instead just wanted to say, he talked about the consequences of indifference, which means ignoring something that you should be paying attention to because it's a terrible injustice. That would be great too, right? There's a million ways to say this. All of this would result in a paragraph that really summarized the speech that Elie Wiesel gave. You know, I could keep going. These two gist statements really work together. Indifference is both a sin and a punishment because bystanders abandoned prisoners in the Holocaust. And despite knowing about the Holocaust, world leaders and people were indifferent. Those are related, right? They abandoned people in the Holocaust because they were showing indifference, right? And so I came here, I summarized them. Despite knowing about the Holocaust, bystanders sinned by being indifferent and doing nothing, which abandoned the prisoners in their suffering, right? And then finally, I looked at this and I thought to myself, I actually think these two final gists serve as a nice concluding sentence, right? And so when I looked at these, despite the centuries' traumas, humanity made progress and learned to intervene against injustice, and humans learning to reject indifference provides hope, but history repeating itself remains terrifying. And so I said here, despite continued tragedies, Wiesel expressed hope that humans have learned to intervene against injustice, but history repeating itself through indifference is terrifying. And so, you know, when you come here now, you have a complete paragraph, right? In his 1999 speech, The Perils of Indifference, Wiesel urges people to reject indifference toward human suffering. Wiesel remembers being liberated from Buchenwald, thankful for American soldiers' rage and compassion. He discusses world violence and tragedies, recognizing that indifference is easy, but has the terrible consequence of rejecting humanity and aiding the oppressor. Despite knowing about the Holocaust, bystanders sinned through indifference and doing nothing, which abandoned prisoners in their suffering. Despite continued tragedies, Wiesel expresses hope that humans have learned to intervene against injustice, but history repeating itself through indifference is terrifying. And I might prompt students, if I got to this stage of the writing process, to say, hey, I noticed you used the words indifference and injustice. Could you come back and use the word profound? Right? And so, you know, students could then analyze their writing. I came here just thinking to myself, well, I know I didn't use the word profound. Where could I find it here? And I noticed that this word terrible could probably be replaced, right? But has the terrible consequence. I don't know that I think terrible even perfectly expresses the idea there. it has a profound consequence. That is much more impactful writing, right? And so I could change my writing there, but I also could add another sentence if needed to. If students can't find a word to replace, they can tweak or edit a sentence, or they can revise a sentence, or even add an additional sentence to see if they can use all of the vocabulary words and bring that instruction full circle. And so the key takeaways from this are, you aren't just talking about random comprehension questions. The most common comprehension instruction I see in classrooms is a teacher asks a question, one student raises their hand, they answer the question, a lot of the rest of the class wasn't even with them, right? And so only the student who already comprehended that passage got practice, whereas with Get the Gist, it requires every student to engage with the practice. Again, I partner students up to do this. And so let's talk about some how-tos, right? Because I don't want to end with just, hey, here's all these great strategies. They can look a lot of different ways. But we talked about vocabulary, right? Tackle it 5 minutes a day. Pick an instructional practice, one of the vocabulary activities, and come back. Over the course of the week, research would suggest you can teach about 6 to 8 words in a particular subject area, right? And so if you are a teacher, you can cover about 8 words over the course of that week, as long as you would loop back to them continuously, right? Students need, at least 12 to 16 exposures to those words if they're going to remember them. And so Monday, I might pick 2 vocabulary activities and use those 2. I would introduce the words and do just a quick example, non-example, of 4 of the words. Tuesday, I'm going to teach the next ones. I'm going to come back to those 4 and do a student-generated example or some sentence stems, right? Wednesday, I'm going to pick out just a random handful of those and do 3 new activities, right? I'm just whipping through those. Before I ask students to read the passage, I might do the multisyllabic word reading part by part on the board. There'd be nothing wrong with a PowerPoint where you ask students, does this word have a prefix or suffix? Then your circles pop up on the board. All right, what are the vowels in the middle? Your underlines pop up. Now let's read it together as a whole group, part by part. Even something as fast as that will help your most struggling readers in their core instruction classes. Obviously, if you get to small group, you want students doing that breaking up of the word themselves, right? But even just reviewing those words will help students read more accurately and efficiently. If you could get every core general education teacher doing some review of multisyllabic word reading, I guarantee you at least probably 1/3 of your class needs it, of every class. What we know from research is 2 out of 3 kids read below grade level and 1 out of 3 read significantly below grade level. So those 1 out of 3 would benefit from doing some whole group core instruction on multisyllabic word reading. I go in, I do the repeated reading with a partner read activity. Don't be afraid to come back to the same passage. One of the things I think teachers struggle with is we read a passage on this day, the next day something brand new. There's nothing wrong with going really deep with this passage. Students will become better readers if they do that, particularly if you're talking about the interventionists who are pulling students out. Those students are going to need repeated exposures to the same passage. And then finally, for main idea, I integrate that with my repeated reading. We say we need a practice, a purpose for each repeated reading. The purpose could be finding the gist for each paragraph they read, right? That could be a great purpose. That makes it feel far less elementary, where students feel like they're just doing this repeated reading and it doesn't matter. The first time I tell students, when the first reader is reading, I want you just to listen. After the second reader reads, then I want you working together to write a gist. Now remember, you've paired partners, a stronger reader and a weaker reader. That's purposeful. You now have students to work together to find those gist statements with somebody who can lead the charge there if somebody else is struggling. Final questions about how you integrate all of this and what it looks like in practice. Okay, I'm glad it was helpful, you guys. Yes. Yes. The hardest part is convincing them that they are reading teachers. Yes. Yeah, it's the hardest part by far. I was an AP. I lived in this world, right? And so the hardest part, they will tell you, but I'm not a reading teacher, and they will feel uncomfortable doing it because when students do something like predator, they don't know what to do with it, right? And so they need some training on, hey, what does this look like? How do I provide that corrective feedback? But also just telling them, hey, if I tried this and I circled pre and it didn't work, that's okay. This word's tricky. Let me just help you with this one, part by part, right? Even if they could just do that practice of scooping under each syllable of the word and reading it part by part, that would be beneficial. The vocabulary, you will hear it takes too much time. I hear if you could do 5 to 10 minutes at a time each day, It's more manageable. The other thing I will say about vocabulary instruction is it takes a long time to plan. And so the final thing that I will tell you is that AI is really good at this. You have to tell it where to get its information. I sourced this stuff from the text Bringing Words to Life by Beck and McCown and Kukan. And if you tell it, will you use the Bringing Words to Life vocabulary routine to develop some example, non-example activities for the words blank, blank, and blank, it will generate this for you. But the key with AI is if you don't tell it where to get its information from, it will shoot out something that's wonky, right? And so like you have to tell it where to source it. But Bringing Words to Life is a great model. I've done tons of it. I like Claude. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but like Claude does a really nice job. I know that exact prompt of use the Bringing Words to Life framework to generate robust vocabulary instruction for the word profound. And it will spit out, and if you tell it, make an example, non-example, a sentence stem, a close reading passage, it will shoot out all of those for the teachers. What was it called? Bringing Words to Life. Oh, Claude. See, I will write it up here. Yes. And I'm sure others do it too. Yeah, it's just like ChatGPT or any of the others. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, one quick question. You had mentioned, like, are there non-negotiables for vocabulary instruction? Because all the vocab strategies, like, in isolation, I would use them all the time in my classroom.
Yes.
But if I'm just building out, like, the essentials of the vocab instruction, 2 to 3 essential words to focus on, use like 16 exposures.
Yeah, so I think to me, if I was going to be coaching a teacher on like non-negotiables, picking 2 to 3 words per passage, providing a student-friendly definition, and then choosing, I would give them a number of activities. So I want 16 exposures across 3 different activities. That's what I think I would guide a teacher to do. That way it gives them some freedom, but you know you're going to get to those repeated exposures. And I would, for secondary students, I would really encourage at least one of those activities to be reading or writing. Yeah.
Speaking?
I would always include a speaking if you have a large number of English learners in particular. Yeah. And so the other thing I really like to point out about the Anita Archer videos is that when she's going through that, she provides a lot of low-risk ways for students to use that word. So if you notice, like the word was discard, and she's like, so, you know, if I found all those old transparencies in my basement, I might want to, and discard them. It's low risk, right? Students know what to say. They might not even fully understand why they're saying it yet, but they're getting a chance to feel that word in their mouth and practice using it. Yeah, really good questions. Other questions? All right, you guys, I will be around, so if you have any, I guess I'm the great one who gets to break you for lunch, so.